Games, boards games. We might be talking about making board games, but we're not gonna shout. Frank's now the president of the Game Manufacturers Association, and this is quite a respected position. Congratulations, Frank, on your new role. I hope that it all goes well. I hope it goes very well. I'm going to say it again. I'll finish singing and we'll start talking then. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are. It is 10 a.m. UK time, time for Busy Beats and Boards Game Blether, episode 748. We are talking about what is GAMA, and Frank West, you are largely known for, obviously, I Love Cats. I mean, you started off with City of Kings and like Victorian Gardens. It's a lovely wee thing. And then you ran a couple of the most lovely, charming conventions, which sadly demand outstripped what you were able to provide. You decided, no, it's just going to end up in disappointment. And now you've decided to go on to the next challenge, essentially. If you've decided that, hey, I've basically conquered this, I've managed to crack the BGG top 100, I've managed to get myself into all the distribution networks, I've managed to get this truly international game, and now you want to help other people make games. Is that fair to say? And what would you like people to know about you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is the thing for me is I'm someone who, I set myself goals. And when I first got into this industry, 7 years ago or something, when I sat down and said, what do I want to achieve? I wrote down a list. And, some of those things were what I considered at the time as like impossible big dreams, right? I love the idea of one day designing a game that would get to the top 100 on Board Game Geek. I love the idea of one day running a Kickstarter that would have 10,000 backers. Like, these are things that I never expected to really get to, but I wanted to push myself to get to. And I've been very, very fortunate. Over the years, I've started ticking off a lot of those goals. And a lot of the stuff I set myself when I got into this hobby is kind of ticked off. And obviously that doesn't mean I want to stop. It means I want to push further. I want to push harder. But now my goals are kind of shifting. And my goals are much more about kind of sharing the hobby, getting more people on board, helping people become more aware of it. Because a lot of the satisfaction I get is people coming up to me and saying, hey, I played the Art of Cats. It was the first game I ever played. And now I own like 10 other board games and I'm really enjoying it. And it's great, and it's so cool to see people. So, like trying to organize events, trying to do stuff to just help people discover it. And that doesn't necessarily mean discover it through my games. I do plenty of stuff where it's other games, right? My games aren't the best games for everyone. So,
but you still got the ego that you want to be the facilitator in its events. And hey, we're going to have other stuff. And hey, it's because of me. I am with you there. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but everyone's got a bit of an ego, right? You want to be validated. You want to feel responsible, like you have a purpose.
Absolutely. And I think I do a lot of stuff for the reward, right? And reward is defined in different ways. Like when you run a business, a lot of people think of reward as making money, and being profitable. But for me at this point, reward is kind of being happy, being content, like feeling like I've done good things. And those good things, they don't have to be profitable, right? They don't have to be things that I'm necessarily making money off. As long as I can afford to live, for me, it's seeing happiness. Like one of my favorite memories is someone coming up to me saying, they went to hospital to give birth. And whilst they were in the room at the hospital, they had like a delayed birth. So they were there for a while and they were playing one of my games on the side. And like, it was the thing that they used for comfort during that time. And that's just extraordinary to me. Like that for me is more rewarding than
I'm curious, which one was it?
It was Isle of Cats, believe it or not, which I mean, I don't know how they weren't kicking it around the room and like knocking pieces off, because
I would have expected it to be Victorian Gardens, to be honest.
Exactly. But that kind of reward is so satisfying to me now that makes me feel good. And part of this kind of leap into the GAMA position is about being able to do that kind of on large, right? It's about having
Mm-hmm.
a wider tool set and helping more people to kind of do that on a far greater scale.
And I do want to talk a bit more about you and your presidency and
Mhm.
what that actually means, what your powers are. But before we do that, I would like to talk a tiny bit about Frank West, the designer.
Yep,
Does this
absolutely.
mean that you've talked about you, I mean, sure, you've not won the Spiel des Jahres
Mhm.
yet. You've not cracked the top one on Board Game Geek yet.
Yes.
So are these actual goals that you're going to set, or are we going to keep seeing new games at a similar rate? Which, to be fair, you were never the most prolific designer, but are you going to slightly slow down, or are you going to keep up with a similar rate a game every year or
Mhm.
two?
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great question. So for me, by by design, I aim to put out one new game every 12 to 18 months. That's always been the plan. I've never
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be pushing lots of games out. And within that, there might also be expansions for older games. Like that's a secondary thing, but the core goal has always been a game every 12 to 18 months. Because for me, I enjoy the design process, but I also, as I kind of go through the publishing steps, of kind of sorting artwork, graphic design, playtesting, and all of these kind of things, I want to make sure that I'm 100% confident that that game is
Mm-hmm.
the right game. And there are some games that I've worked on and I've spent tens of thousands of pounds on. I've got the artwork done, I've had sculpted miniatures and all sorts. And then I've pulled the plug because there's been a point where I've just been like, it's great, but it's not like where I want it to be. It's not at that point. And because I know when I release a game, I'm going to invest 1 to 2 years of my life into that, through manufacturing, Kickstarter, marketing, sales, shows. I have to be 100% convinced. So what that means is I need to give myself enough time to know that that game is the right game to
Yeah, you need to
release.
be able to have actual, not just design, but exploratory design, kind of
Exactly.
seeing the possibilities before you say, okay, this is the right thing, and continue working on this before you get to the developments. And by taking on these additional gamma responsibilities, ba- are you fundamentally saying, okay, I am going to be spending a couple of hours less a day on my design work, and I am going to be, maybe rather than 12 to 18 months, if you continue to
Mhm.
think as carefully as you have been, which I applaud you for, is it going to be maybe every 18 to 24 months or a little bit of a slow?
And right now, I still think it'll be the 12 to 18 months. And there's two kind of core reasons for that. The majority of the rolling gamma isn't you have to do X hours on these days. There's things that come and go and you can schedule them. So, for example, if I've been designing a game and I'm really happy with it, and now I want to playtest that game, but I can't playtest it until the day after tomorrow, then I can use tomorrow to do a lot of the gamma work, not delay anything with
Mhm.
that game, and kind of still get both of those things done within the same period of kind of time. So there's a lot of kind of juggling, but I don't feel like unless, there's obviously always unexpected situations that arise. But outside of that, right now, I'm not too concerned with that side of things.
Mm-mm. That makes sense. And hello, Seat. It is, as always, lovely to see you. And
Oh,
I would like to carry on and ask you about some recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights. So, what has been good for you recently? Myself, I finished up my Kickstarter. It was just over 200 backers. Given the amount of work that I put into it, I am really feeling fortunate because, frankly, it had 0 reviews. And the only thing that people knew about it is what I told them. And I wasn't sure if I should launch that Kickstarter,
mhm.
frankly. I'd done it as quickly as I could just to get the preview thing up. There had been 15 people signed up to say, yeah, we want. And then, is there a demand? I don't know. But I spent less than a day kind of finishing it all up, thinking, well, even if 30 people sign up, that's still 30 more people that
Mhm.
I've launched. And because what I'm doing now is print on demand, that's a very different situation. But now, thanks to the fact that there are hundreds of copies spoken for, that means that I will soon fingers crossed by the end of the year, finally be able to get out the bloomin' categorical, which has been this, thanks to pandemic and Brexit. Sorry to get political. It's been this albatross on my back for a few years, and I wanted to get it out in 2021, but it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
And hopefully it will finally come out over a year late, but people are being very understanding.
I know that feeling well. I've got a game which I was so excited about at like the start of 2020 from a design perspective and prototyping, but it's a really big game that you have to be sat at a table to play. Like, it just doesn't work digitally. And then obviously lockdowns happened and it kind of just got pushed back and back and back. And so many of my friends were like, are we gonna like ever do anything with this game? And I'm like, at some point, yes, like we're gonna go back. But congratulations on the Kickstarter and stuff. Like, one of the things that I really love about what you do is the fact that you're not afraid to put something on Kickstarter like that. I feel like these days Kickstarter's become very there's like a set template, right, that a lot of people follow. You need to have this, you need to have that, and you have to tick all these boxes. But with your campaigns, you're kind of brave enough to try different things, do different things, and they work, and it's an amazing achievement. So I always love seeing them go up, and congratulations on it kind of succeeding.
Thank you very much. And you say I'm not afraid, but as there was a massive amount of fear, I'm not going to lie, and
but you still did it, right? That's the thing. You still pressed that launch button.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of fear. Like, frankly, I don't know why, given the number of conventions I've been to, but going to Tabletop Scotland, especially going up when I thought I might only have the one helper, I was scared. But I was like, you know what? Even if it's just me and Jane is only able to help a few hours of each day, it won't be perfect. There will be some people who come to the stand and just aren't able to talk to me or get to demo if there's only two of us. That's the reality. But there will still be some people who are able to have a good time, and it's still worth going, and hopefully it will be fun. But how about you? Have you played, what's the recent games that you played? Is there anything you want to give a shout out to, or anything that you've done recently?
One game I've been playing recently is a game called Karuka. I don't know if you've heard of it or not.
Oh, the flicky games, that's kind of like snooker. I think it's made in the UK, and so it's got like spinny boards. Yeah, I played it.
Creators.
It's really high skill floor, I would say.
Kind of board. Yeah.
You need to be pretty good in order to actually start enjoying it, frankly.
I think for me, the thing is that with Crokinole, I love all of these kind of games. With Crokinole, I feel like if you're playing against people who are very different levels, you're just going to get destroyed because there's a real skill level to it. With Karuka, the same still applies. There is a skill level to it, but there's more options available to you early on. So you feel like you can have fun. You still might not win, but at least you feel like you can do fun things and try and achieve stuff with it. I come from a snooker background, and Karuka is thematically snooker as a physical
gives you a
game,
big advantage.
So that's it's an advantage, but it's just nice because I can't have a snooker table in my house, and whilst it's not quite the same, like it's just a really nice thing to have and to be able to play, and I do really enjoy it.
Fantastic. And I have no idea if I'm saying frankly more often than usual. You'll have to be the judge of that.
I used to work in an office, and the main salesman there, who was very loud on the phone, every time he spoke, he'd always be like, "To be frank," and every time I'd look over and be like, "Are you calling me? Are you not calling me?" And I never got used to it. In like 2 years of being in that office, I never got used to it every single day.
Well, before we get to the main topic, I always like to share something that we might have overlooked. Frank, do you have a brilliant thing? Brilliant thing? What's a little thing which is brilliant?
Yeah, it's funny because I was wondering what I was going to answer for this, and I've got a few things which I wouldn't consider little things because they're expensive, and whilst they're still small, that doesn't really tick the box. But one of the things I love more than anything is this, which is this small little piece of plastic, and it just folds up, and it's simply you open it up, put it on your desk, and then you put your phone on it, and it just holds your phone or your tablet and allows them to stand up on your desk. And I love this. As someone who's very protective of my phone, and I don't have a case for my phone, I don't like just putting it on my desk, and being able to put it on something, having it stood up, being able to use the screen, to do calls or just listen to stuff or watch YouTube videos whilst on my computer. It's like, it's a tiny little thing, but I love it. I take it everywhere and I just use it all the time, like far more than you probably should.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I can imagine you praying at the altar of your phone. But as always, during all of these shows, I do have some questions, but anyone who's watching, feel free to comment, ask questions from follow. If you are watching live, then I will try to get to all of those questions. If you're watching after the fact, then I can't promise that Frank will answer any of them. But, we'll see how this goes. And if there's a lot of stuff, then, okay, I'll allow one ridiculous question. Frank, would you rather have a meeple-sized duck or a duck-sized meeple?
As long as it's healthy, then a meeple-sized duck. I mean, obviously, as long as it's a healthy, well-looked-after animal, then meeple-sized duck would be cool. I'd love to have one that can just kind of run around on my desk whilst I'm working and just living a good life, I guess.
Yeah, it is a really cool thing, and sometimes wonder about the people who say the opposite. So let's get into GAMA. I mean, yes. There's this lovely description, which I kind of paraphrased for this video, which explains quite a lot of what's going on. But in your own words, how would you describe GAMA? What does it do?
And this is one of the things. So one of the, just before I answer that, one of the things I'm currently pushing to try and change in GAMA is I want the website to be rewritten from a kind of teenager level English rather than necessarily someone who's got a big understanding of more of the complexities of how trade associations and stuff work. Because whilst there are some great descriptions on there, there's a lot of people who aren't familiar with this stuff who just don't understand what some of these things mean. So for me, and what we're going to discuss today, I'm going to try and talk as simply as possible and try and paraphrase stuff down to the more understandable kind of level. So GAMA as a whole is a trade association, and it's a non-profit organization, so it doesn't make money. Its job is to better the board game hobby industry for everyone. So it is trying to make tabletop gaming better. It's trying to promote it to more people. It's trying to make it safer. It's trying to give people opportunities to make games easier, sell more games, to make content creators have an easier time and have more people aware of it. But really, GAMA is there to promote tabletop as a hobby to the wider audience and to help the businesses within it do that. So it's membership. All of the members of the trade association, because you can become a member, are people who run, own, or work in businesses within the hobby.
And if you apply, is there some sort of screening to say, oh, are you actually, or could it be someone who's just starting to work on their first game?
So yeah, so there are different types of membership. So there are 6 different membership groups. The membership groups are things like retailer, manufacturer, distributor, creative, media/events, or publisher. So when you join, you say which group you want to be a part of. And as long as you can basically put forward a case that shows that you are working within that role, then you will be able to get in. There is a screening process, but it's not difficult, like if you've literally said tomorrow, hey, I've just registered a publishing company and, the company exists, I'm now going to start trying to work on my first game, you would qualify at that point. It's not trying to...
And what if you hadn't registered a publishing company? What if you hadn't registered a publishing company? What if you just said, okay, I've been working on my first game and I assume there has to be something public out there so that you can say, yeah, I am actually designing this or working with
and I think in that case, and I personally don't handle the membership application process, but my understanding is of that case that when you submit it, you would put your details in, and then they would come back to you and say, like, can you confirm this? Can you answer this? And there would be a bit of a back and forth to understand that. Because the important thing of GAMA is obviously they do want to make sure that the membership is people working in the industry, but at the same time it's trying to be as inclusive and wide reaching as possible, because a lot of what it does is education, and obviously if you're newer to the industry, then education may be more valuable to you than if you've been in the industry for 20 years. So a big part of it is bringing in those kind of newer people.
And so much of the people working here aren't doing it as a full-time thing. So many people, I mean, I'm fortunate since that I'm able, but so many people are doing it in their evenings or whatever.
Yes, absolutely.
And so many people, as you say, just starting off, might not have much to show just yet and might never register a company because it just doesn't work out financially for them. And
this is it obviously it's not a direct answer, but in part is one of the answers that the creator membership group exists, because we wanted to make sure that people who were creating still had that place. So if you want to create a game, but you might self-publish it, but at the moment you don't really consider yourself someone at that point of publishing and making that game, and you don't see yourself so much as a publisher and stuff, that might be a better place for you. So people who, it says on there, like, game developers, like a lot of game developers aren't full-time game developers, but it still gives them that opportunity. As long as they can show that that's something they're doing, then that's a group that would fit well for them.
And yeah, just to answer Xate's question, because I think there is a lot of imposter syndrome, and this is the social, community manager for Board Game Arena asking, am I technically in the industry or not? And I would have thought there's absolutely no question in my mind that you are. I mean, you have a full-time job working for Board Game Arena. And so this is something that I think so many of us are struggling with. The question of, does this count? Am I valid? Please look at me. Please say that I'm worthy. And
so I think that the technical kind of answer there, which is where part of that role situation comes in, is that a lot of the membership is company, and if a company joins, then their staff become members through that if they're put on the list of people who want to be a part of that. So for example, if you work for Board Game Arena and Board Game Arena becomes a member, then you can basically be a member through that. But if you want to be your own member, then it depends on what you're doing. And if you are, like, if you consider yourself a creator within the subset of your role and so on, then that would be something you could put forward.
I mean, I guess that would probably be media and events, because I can't see anything that would better fit. Would you agree, or?
I think if you're like a
for
community
all
manager,
digital thing, carry on.
Then as a community manager, I would say it would sit within the media and events. In regards to like Board Game Arena, then they would probably need to reach out, and like it would be a discussion to see where they kind of best fit. One of the challenges with this is and we'll probably come on to this in a minute, is the reason for the membership groups and having the range and how they are and set up is really important to make sure that GAMA is operating well. So it's not something where we want to create 20 different membership groups, because at that point things start to break down. And what I mean by this is the membership groups are like that, whilst you won't really experience much different, they're subgroups within GAMA, and each of those has a voted for elected person who is the representative of their group. And that person then sits on the board and has a big input on how GAMA runs. So it's important to make sure that there's enough groups to get enough different types of people on the board who do different things, but equally not get to a point where there's so many groups that there's only 2 members in a group and there's no election and there's no one who can be representing a group because there's not enough people. And as the association grows, then maybe new groups will come along and we'll kind of see how that pace kind of comes in.
Sure, let's talk about that structure a little bit.
Mhm.
So for media and events, Nick Brady,
Yep.
retail, John Coviello, Matt Fantastic for the creators, Reid Gronis, I'm apologising if I get some of these names wrong, for production manufacturer, Bill He for wholesale, Eric Price for production manufacturer, and some of these groups have multiple
So every
people on
group
the
has
board.
2 people.
Okay.
And when you get elected into that position, you get the position for 2 years, and every year there is an election, and the 6 people get elected. So, for example, if you ran for the next election, then you would be from 2023 to 2025. And in 2024, the other representative from your group would be elected, and they would be 2024 to 2026 to make sure there's always an overlap of 1 year, so nothing gets lost, but there's always 2 people to represent the group fairly.
That makes a lot of sense. I really like the idea of having these overlapping structures.
Mhm.
And then you've got these other people. Can you talk about John Stacey, Chris Martini, Paul,
Yeah,
who are
absolutely.
Paul and
So
Gregoire, Adam, Cynthia,
this is
Brian?
this is one of the things which I feel isn't obvious about GAMA to people who aren't familiar with trade associations. And before I answer your question, Bez, as a question to yourself, without GAMA, like, do you have any experience with trade associations as someone who lives like in the UK? Is it something you've ever kind of really come across or discussed before outside of GAMA?
No.
And that's a fair answer. It's the same for me. And I feel like trade associations are something that are much bigger in America than perhaps in other places. So this is why it's interesting. And I feel like we need to reshape how some of this website information works and why I'm coming on shows to talk about it. So GAMA has 2 teams. Obviously, we work together as one team, but there are 2 sets of people. There is the board of directors, and the board are elected
And so for
members.
how UK-based people, could this be analogous to the House of Commons and the House of Lords? I mean, they're all elected, it sounds like. Are they all elected?
So this is quite different to that. So
Okay.
with the board itself, that's 12 elected people who are the 6 different membership groups, 2 from each, and they get voted in. The other team are all full-time paid staff who work for GAMA to do the operational tasks. So the job of the board is voluntary. None of us get paid. It's entirely voluntary. And our role is to create the strategic direction for GAMA. The paid staff, which is led up by John Stacey, so the executive director and runs the paid staff, John's role and their team is to get things done. So the way this is often described is if you imagine a bicycle, then the board of directors are the handlebars that are steering that bike, and the operational team are the pedals that are driving it forward in the direction that the board are choosing.
Okay, and one of those jobs is a lot easier.
Oh, I have lost you for a second, Bez. So hopefully you'll come back.
Frankly.
I feel like this is where I do a little dance and do a kind of a Bez thing whilst we're waiting for them to come back. So we will do this. But yeah, so to kind of just discuss this a little bit more whilst we're waiting for Bez to return, it's really important to understand that those 2 teams are working perfectly together. They work in harmony, and the relationship between those 2 teams is really important. But the board, who are often the people you hear about when talking about GAMA, they are voluntary people, right? They get no money, they don't get paid. They're people who have put forward their time to try and make GAMA better. And the staff are full-time employees. You're going to have marketing people, you're going to have admin people, event managers, and so on. They're just paid staff who all do a fantastic job, but obviously are working to achieve those goals. Welcome back, Bez.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I might need something fixing with this laptop. This is the second time it's happened this week. That's really not
unfortunate.
good. But yes, I apologize for that. Getting back to the questions I have,
Mhm,
let's actually try and go through communication within the teams.
mhm.
Because before we went live, I was talking about, sure, these directors are meant to be steering, but how can we be sure that there is communication going through?
Mhm.
How can we be sure that this team of what is meant to be a bunch of experts who know what needs to be done is actually listened to?
Yeah, absolutely. So this kind of there's two sides to this. There's within the board themselves, right, to make sure that board members are listening to other board members. Because if I turn around and said, "Hey, I think we should now put 10% of our budget and focus into Asia," then I can't make that decision on my own, right? It's something the board would have to discuss. We'd have to look at the pros and cons and work out why we want to do that. So the board have a monthly board meeting, which is a grand affair where we kind of go through all of the stuff that's happened. We go through like previous notes. We talk about stuff. The committees, the group heads all give their reports. The executive director, John Stacey, talks about what's been happening. And it's a big kind of formal thing. We then have a weekly informal meeting, which is non-public, and it's just something within the board itself where we have an allotted time each week and people can just turn up. You're like, if you are on the board and you want to discuss stuff, turn up and it's an opportunity to talk. We obviously then have open emails and we have an email group that we can share between, but there's a lot of channels for the board to talk through. One of the challenges is what happens next, right? So let's say we've agreed that we're going to do this thing. Let's say that we've talked about it, people are happy with it. How does that move forward? And one of the challenges that I saw within GAMA, and this is something that I'm working on improving now, is often that will then get presented to the staff, and then there's no back and forwards, right? Like it happens, and either they do it or they don't do it. Most often they do it, but because they're running at full pace and there's so much they're trying to get done, once it's done, and we kind of move on. So for me, I'm trying to better that communication and also make it more public, the cool things are getting done, because there's a lot of great stuff that Gamma's doing, but often it just kind of gets done and they move on. And to be fair to the staff, and something that I think is really important to note, is that the pandemic was very, very difficult for them. Like with a lot of people, but a lot of the money that GAMA uses to operate the association comes from the two events that it organizes each year. They make up the vast, vast majority of the money. And they actually had to downsize the team considerably in 2020 and lost a number of staff because of that. And now they're starting to rehire people and bring people back in, and the team is growing. But what it does
When you say the two events, do you mean the industry-only events, or are you also referring to Origins?
So there's the GAMA Expo, which is the business-to-business event, and then there's Origins, which is the business-to-consumer event, so the open public event. So,
and sorry, carry on.
So I was going to say, so what's kind of very important to understand is, like, as with a lot of stuff, that last 2 years has been very rough for them because of that. And now we're working on kind of improving that. And this is why I wanted to kind of step up and do this now, because I feel like this is a fresh opportunity. You know, the staff team is growing. There's a lot of new people. The board has recently been restructured to have these 6 membership groups, because 4 years ago, that wasn't a thing. Like, it was all publishers and retailers, and there was no one from media. There was no one from distribution. And they've widened this. They've made it more open. And it's such a great transition, such an opportunity to now, go down the hill. Like, they've been climbing and climbing and climbing with issues and changes and problems. We're now at the top, everything's set. And I just want to kind of launch us into like this great unknown of hopefully really cool and exciting stuff.
I mean, there have been, I know in 2020, there was the whole, or 2021, it's so hard to keep track, when the Black Lives Matter movement became a thing, and everyone was expected to make a declaration to say, yes, this is a safe space. We do care about people. And frankly, GAMA has, I've got nothing against white guys. As far as I'm aware, you are a white cis man, and But when everyone on a board is kind of part of that, it does feel important to say, yes, we do care about people of different colours. And so that was something that then led to a lot of people pulling out of Origins. And it was a bit of, yeah, I know this is done. Is there anything that you can say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing to kind of, I guess, clarify was I wasn't on the board at that time, so I wasn't privy to the conversations, and I don't know exactly what was said by who or what. What I would say, though, is it's very hard for GAMA to know its place. And I think in the position of the Black Lives Matters situation, I think that they did get it wrong. You know, they did slip up, they did make a mistake. And as far as I'm aware, the vast majority of people within both the staff and the current board are very aware of that. One of the things that I think is really critical is there's a lot of new people who have come onto the board in the last year. Like the majority of the board is newer people. And this is really important because GAMA has been around in some form since the mid 70s. It's been around longer than I've been alive, you know, and it has changed multiple times during that process. But what this means is that traditionally, if you go back, you know, to 20 years ago when it was still a 20-plus-year-old association, you did get that kind of feel of the old boys club, you know, the people who have been there since the beginning. They have the power, they have the say. And this was always a battle because as new people came in, you might remember 5 years ago, being a Kickstarter creator wasn't what it was today. You know, back then it was a very different, oh, you're not a real publisher, you're not a real designer, you know, this is Kickstarter, it's a fad. Well, now it's a huge thing. And this new up and coming group of people, as the industry changed and more people came in, there was this hesitancy to kind of adopt it and bring it in and grow. So there was a big battle for kind of making it modern. And this is why a few years ago they kicked off this changing the board structure. So it wasn't just, you know, publishers who were running this group. It was everyone had their say. Everyone had their fair say. There was the events people on the board, there was creators on the board, and so on. And a lot of this is to make sure that now new people can be there, people who have fresh understandings of kind of, I hate to say it, but the modern world, right? And it shouldn't be the modern world. It's how the world should have been, but it's what we're kind of changing into, understanding that there are messages that have to be...
And frankly, there are still problems throughout the world. I mean, we can't pretend that there's no bigotry within the world. There's a lot of problematic things everywhere, including within the UK, including within USA. I mean, we don't have to go to Russia or other countries to pretend that, you know, problems are not at our own doorstep.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I see it myself. You know, I was on the bus the other day and someone said a word which I would never say in my life, and I was, you know, just it just stunned me, right? The fact that people are out in public doing this kind of thing and saying these kind of things, and it is important. So kind of getting back to the core question is, GAMA is trying very hard to work out how to fix these problems, because one of the challenges I think that happens, and, you know, rightly so, is when you make a mistake, you have to be accountable for that mistake, right? You have to learn from it.
And the implied question is clearly, how do you move on? How do you do better next time?
Exactly.
It's not that I'm sitting here demanding reparations from you or anyone. It's just that I'm wanting to know how not this particular mistake, but anything similar can be avoided in the future.
And exactly that. And as I say, so part of that is that restructuring of the board, making sure there's a wider, more modern voice to it. The second one is making sure that we have people who are spending time looking into this. So GAMA is made up of committees, and there are different committees that do different things. And one of those committees is the Diversity Inclusivity Committee. And they are focused on how does GAMA become more inclusive? How do we become more diverse? How do we do things for this? So something that they set up, which I believe was set up, I believe last year was the first year it happened, is the Horizons Fellowship Program. And this is basically a program where if you come from an underrepresented background, you can put yourself forward for it, and 10 people will be selected. And then those 10 people will be given a mentorship. They will be given finances to help support various things. And then they will also have travel and hotel costs paid for to come to GAMA Expo and be given the space to present their work or their products or whatever they do to retailers and all of the other business officials who come to the GAMA Expo. So this is something where they're really trying to make sure that we're actively bringing people in, helping those people, giving them the place, not just like mentorship, not just saying, hey, we've set up a scheme where you're going to spend an hour a month talking with someone, which is great, but it's not enough. So investing money and just investing time into that, and then giving them the platform and helping them build those network connections so they can move forward. My understanding is that the people who did it this last year, and March was April this year was when like the end of the first one happened. We're very happy with kind of how it went and very positive about it. And lessons were learned, and moving forward, doing more of that. And not just that, right? But those kind of things just to help. Mm-hmm. I think with your statement about the board and the board being kind of made up of white people, and I think this is a really good kind of question and statement, because it's a challenge to fix. And I'll kind of give you reasons, because it shouldn't be, but it is. And as we know, the board itself is elected from GAMA members. And what that means is that you need to be a GAMA member to be elected into the board. And you need to be, obviously, the amount of GAMA members, the vast majority of them are white people. There's the growth of people of color who work professionally in the industry is growing. It is getting bigger. More people are coming in. But there is still this much more, it's an underrepresented group, right? It's a much smaller proportion. So for us, the challenge is you have to have someone who's a member, who's working within a particular field, who is also then someone who has the time to be able to put forward to volunteer to be on the board, and also has the desires to be someone who steps up and do that. And obviously, I'm sure, as you know, like, you create games for a living. If I said to you, can I have 10 hours a month of your time to do this voluntary thing? You're going to have to think about whether you have the time to do that, whether the impact, and you may say yes, you may say no. So it's not just a case of, hey, if we've got one person on color on GAMA and therefore we can make sure that they join the board, because that's not right. And also, it's not about
it is kind of free labor. I mean, it is nice to be able to steer the ship, but at the same time, it is a privileged position to be in, where you can devote the time to this, as you say.
So for me, a big part of the solution to this, which isn't an immediate fix, but it comes in twofold. One of them is making sure that anyone who steps up to be on the board feels like it's a safe place where they can't be targeted, that they have no threats of attack or negativity, and they can have a voice, be treated equally, fairly, and have that position. The second part of it is to help and encourage more people from underrepresented groups to join the GAMA, to help them grow, become successful, and give them the time where they can put forward that effort into being on the board. And again, none of this is going to happen overnight, but it's stuff that is being actively worked on and pushed. And I would love to be in a situation where in a few years' time, there is a wide range of diverse people from different backgrounds, different colors of skin, different religious beliefs, different this, different that, on the board, putting forward their stuff. And I feel like it's the direction that everyone wants it to go, but you can't just overnight. It's not like you can just overnight get someone, and that wouldn't be the right approach either. So it's about building the platform and allowing them to step up, helping them step up, and then making sure that they're protected and safe and comfortable with doing that.
And a quick good morning to Flavian and also Kenichukwu, who are, I see, watching. And I mean, Kenichukwu is doing amazing stuff in Nigeria with kind of really building up that community. And I got a chance to, I guess, work alongside as part of Now Play This, based in London. which was, they came to, I think it was 2019 when I actually met them in real life and developed that relationship. Was fantastic for Now Play This to reach out to someone and bring them in where they wouldn't have that opportunity. But within their own country, they are really encouraging other people. And this is kind of what we need. I would like to talk about your presidency, what that actually means. So if I understood correctly, you are going to be the president for 2 years. Is that correct?
So I am on the board as the representative of publishers for 2 years. But every time new people get elected, so every year there's a re-election of the officer position for presidency, because it has to be that the entire board are happy for that. So I will be the president for the year, but then obviously I can continue to do it, assuming that people want to vote for me and keep me into that position.
Okay, so you are going to be one of 2 publisher nominees who are putting forth your case. And I don't need to go into the logistics of how the voting was done. I assume it's a fairly standard vote everyone gets. Actually, can you very quickly summarize how the voting happened?
So there are 2
before
votes.
we get into your responsibilities.
There is the membership group, so the board of director vote. So if we ignore being president or anything else at the moment, just getting onto the board is a membership vote. So every year you can, if you are a member of GAMA, you can put your name forward and say, I would like to be on the board. This is what I want to do. This is what I would change. Put together your proposal and put it out there. And then everyone will be asked to vote. Only the people within your membership group will vote for you. So you will be voted among, if you joined as a publisher and 2 publishers ran, the publishers would vote for which publisher they want. If you were
and is it always one person, one vote? Like theoretically,
exactly
I assume there's no limit to how many people could run.
So there's no limit to how many people can run, and everyone who is a member of GAMA will basically, they get sent an email with a secure key to it, which allows them to do 1 vote for their membership group, and they select the person on the list that they want to represent them. So it doesn't matter whether you're Asmodee or whether you're City of Games. You're going to get your email, you're going to click your thing, you don't have any more power, whatever. You vote, that person gets elected, whoever has the most votes wins. And obviously at that point, they then become on the board. And at that point, once the new board is formed, and again, there'll only be 6 new people because it alternates each year. At that point, in the first meeting we have together, we then have an internal vote on the board where you put yourself forward for officer positions. The officer positions are president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. And then the board will vote for who they want to have that role.
And it's choosing from between 12 different people, is that correct? So the 6 from the previous year plus the 6 from this year.
Exactly. But obviously only the people who put their names forward for it. So if one person put their name forward, then they're going to get that role.
And so let's get to what the powers are. What can you actually do? Because as you said, you can't just say, okay, we've got some budget, let's allocate half of this budget to this territory. What can you do?
So this is a really interesting question. So GAMA is run by the bylaws. So you can go to the website, you can find the bylaws, and these are the official rules that GAMA has to abide by. And within that, the general definition of the president is that the monthly board meeting, they need to turn up, they need to chair that meeting. And I need to turn up once a month. I need to run the meeting, make sure it happens. And then if there are specific things where someone contacts us or a specific situation happens, the president has to respond or make sure it's actioned. And those are kind of like the key official roles. So, that's what's expected. However, obviously, I am in an elected position. So my role is somewhat defined by myself, what I've told people I want to do and achieve, and the fact that they voted for me. Because obviously, if we get to the next year's election and I haven't done anything apart from turn up to board meetings and host the meeting, no one's going to want me to be president anymore, because what am I achieving? And the second part to that is I can spend as much time or as little time as I like. And again, this helps. Like at the moment, I'm spending probably 25 hours a week kind of focusing on this because it's new. I want to make sure I'm up to speed and make sure I've got all the stuff going on. And the second part to that, which I think is kind of the broader question, is the board itself is responsible for creating the direction of GAMA. And the board itself is basically the boss of the executive director, John Stacey. So John Stacey is the person who's running the day-to-day team that's getting everything done. We write their job description, we decide their salary, we hold them responsible for getting that stuff done. So as the board, we can choose to fire John Stacey and hire a new executive director if we feel like the organization is not being run the way it should be. Obviously, that's not something we're planning to do, but that's the power that we have. And the president, generally speaking, has the deciding vote in the case of like tie-break votes. And so, for example, if we said, we're going to do A, B, and C, and we did a vote and it came back 5-5 and one person decided that they didn't want to vote because they didn't have an opinion, I would get the deciding vote on that. I would also say that
so essentially you get 1.5 votes.
Yeah, to a degree. And the other side of it, which again, this isn't written anywhere, but it's kind of the self-described job that I've given myself, is very often the board will discuss stuff, they'll talk about things they want to have done, but no final decision will be made. So what I will try and do is I'll try and collate everyone's thoughts and say, this is what I think we should do based on what everyone has said. And then, like, are you happy with it? Shall we move forward? And so on. So it's an interesting role because it's not about, hey, I'm in charge, let's do what I want. It's more about, hey, there's a group of people putting forward to stuff. Let's make sure that stuff gets managed and handled in the right way and goes through the right channels so things can get done. And for me personally, I'm also trying to be a bit more of a face for GAMA because I think for a long time, no one really knew who anyone was from GAMA, right? No one from GAMA went and talked on these things and kind of got out there and like put themselves out there. And I want to make sure that when people like see videos, they hear interviews, they can start learning about GAMA and just have a better understanding of what it is.
Yeah, and to answer Xate's question, as we said, the leadership roles are all voluntary, and then the ones on this page, the teams are all paid positions where, as you said, you decide their salary. But I assume it's written into the bylaws that no one on this page is being paid a salary.
Absolutely. So it is entirely voluntary. The only, and also, just to be super clear, if it's not obvious, we're not obviously allowed to use our positions of being on the board to better our companies and get ourselves favors. We're not allowed to promote our own stuff through that. Of course, I can say, I'm designer of Isle of Cats and I do this and that to give the kind of authority of where my experience comes from. But I'm not allowed to, have my game on the back shelf behind me during the board meeting and be like, hey, come and buy.
You do have your arts in the background, though.
I do, but it's non-descriptive. However, I am actually considering.
Was that deliberate that you went to cover up him for a moment there? It seems like you were trying to cover up one of the cats with your head.
No, I try to center myself every so often. Whenever I look at it, I try to make sure that I'm a bit more centered. So, but no, it's something we're actually discussing at the moment of where that line is, because you want to make sure there's a sense of individuality, but you also want to make sure that there's that official kind of position. And the question is like, is this piece of art behind me like actively telling you to go and buy my game and that my game exists and so on, or is it a piece of art? Because if you're not aware of what it's from, then you won't necessarily know. Well, so obviously if you've got a physical product, or if I had a, come to my event on January 22nd written behind me, that's a lot more promotional. So there's a fine line. But I agree with you. Like it's a question that's going through my head as well. So,
I mean, absolutely, a call to action feels very clearly over the line. But and actually, that's a fair point, because as parts of the YouTube description, I've got the description for GAMA for this video, but I also have a bit about you. I've even got a couple of your own personal links for Twitter and your website.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I assume that you've decided that this is not over the line.
Exactly that, because one of the important things about a trade association is that people need to feel like the board, the people making those decisions, are experts that come from different backgrounds and have experience. So the power of the company that you come from and what you have achieved whilst in that company and your experience outside of that is an important part of it, because otherwise it's just 12 people and why is this person representing me? So there is a fine line between making sure people are aware of who you are and what you do and making sure that you're not actively promoting.
Yeah, exactly. Like Snowbright Studios, Funko Games. I mean, I might have, like, as a person, I have heard the name Stephen Bristol. I've got a vague idea. Yeah, I've heard of them. Who are they? Oh, Funko Games. Okay, that's a big company. I
Exactly.
assume they're in charge of Funko Games. I mean, but I don't have to go up and look them up now.
Exactly that. So
Promoted.
that sits within that line and it is an important part of that. And the other thing I would say, in because obviously with the voluntary side and the paid side, so the one thing that the board do get is that with the GAMA Expo, which is the annual business to business event, we are expected to be there to represent the board, and therefore our flights are paid for to fly to the show. So that's the only form of compensation that we get.
And depending on where you live, that could be quite a hefty price.
Yes, absolutely.
One of Now we've been going on so long. I do apologize, and
Oh, it's
there's been
fine.
so. It feels like we've barely scratched the surface because we're just now starting to explore what this means, and we could go another 10 hours, I'm sure. And hopefully, I'll get to have you on again before the end of your presidency. But I think the key pertinent question everyone wants to know is, given you've got 1 year of power, what are you planning to change within that 1 year?
Mhm.
And do you feel that you'll have any influence? Do you have any plans for beyond that? 3-5 years is what someone asked.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because there are lots of things that I would like to get GAMA to do. However, again, it's not my place to specifically say I want to push my own agenda for things I think GAMA should be doing. They're things that the board need to discuss and push forward. So for me, my plans for the future come more down to things like the channel of communication between the board and the operational team, and making sure that when we do put forward suggestions, that there's a process for that. That the process isn't just like, hey, how are you doing today? You know, I thought we should do this, like, and that's the end of it for a year. To make sure that we are having better communication, and not only between the board and the operational team, but between us and the members. Because as you said earlier, you know, the Black Lives Matters stuff that was a couple of years ago now, like, it was handled badly. And whilst I don't think anyone sits there and says, hey, I don't like GAMA now because of what happened 2 years ago and they're never going to fix it and we're never going to give them a chance, I feel like it's important that we now start pushing the good things we're doing. Because how many good things can you list out from the top of your head that you've heard that GAMA's done?
Yeah, I mean, I had heard about the Horizons Fellowship before, but I was actually going to ask if you do any lobbying, because I know this isn't like, you know, a good thing for the sake of the people, but that does also push into, yeah, I don't know. Given your question, I'm assuming there's a lot more that you want to talk about right now. Good things that GAMA is doing.
And that's the thing. So to make sure that that stuff is visible, to make sure stuff gets done, to make sure there's better timelines. So a lot of that is, as much as I hate to say it, it's being a boss of a company, right? Making sure that the company has their agenda and making sure that agenda kind of gets done properly within a reasonable amount of time and is well communicated and publicized. To answer your direct question about kind of
sorry. I was going to
lobbying
say
and
beyond
stuff.
that, like what's are there things that you can point to beyond the Horizons Fellowship that you can say, yes, that's a good thing that we've done?
So yeah, I mean, one of the things that's been like worked on right now, which is again depending on who you are or how you benefit it, is we're currently developing a interactive map, which hopefully will happen. Obviously, again, there might be a technical reason why it doesn't, but it will be a map that you can go to, and it will have every convention that we know of around the world listed on it, so that you can go to it, you can look across the globe, you can look at the map, and then you can click on pins and see what event it is, when it is, the details for it and stuff, to become like an official like place where that can be, that people can then submit events to and so on. So that in the grand scheme of things is a smaller thing, but it's equally something that would be very beneficial, because I know there's lots of people that keep local lists in different places, but obviously a lot of this is voluntary, a lot of it is just regional to certain areas, and trying to create that kind of overarching body where it's professionally maintained by paid staff will help make sure it's up to date and so on. Another great example of something that did happen, and I think this answers your previous statement about lobbying as well, is that it is something that they do, and I may have to do as well if the right thing happens. But you may remember a couple of years ago, in America, they were talking about large trade tariffs for importing board games from China into America. And this was something that would affect all of us, right? Because if we suddenly had a huge increase in the cost into America, it would affect the people buying games as much as the people making them. So at that point, the team from GAMA did go to Washington, and they did lobby against the governing officials. They provided materials for members to be able to help push that, and they did actively kind of work to help make sure that that didn't happen. So there's definitely big influential things that are fantastic, but again, people just don't know about it.
And this is, as you say, really important that it just happens behind the scenes. And I guess parts of it is making people aware of this. And is it relevant to international people? This is a question that Semi-Co-op asked, because all of this lobbying can only be done for US folk. And I understand there is a big privilege of living in the US. You're able to attend Origins and attend the actual GAMA trade fair, which is that business to business thing, which I don't know if I will personally ever be able to go, because there is a big cost involved, as you say. And yeah, is there much international relevance?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. So the first one I would say is, whilst obviously things like that lobbying in America isn't, it's in America and it's American imports and stuff, the vast majority of board games still get sold into America. So for anyone who's operating in Europe who's sending into America, that's still something that's going to benefit you greatly, even though you're not there. But I 100% agree. One of the challenges with GAMA is that it is a global thing, right? It is the worldwide trade association for hobbyist games. It is, and it should be as important for you as it is for any American who works in the hobby. And at the moment, there is a discrepancy because a large amount of the value is seen as being at the expo and being at Origins. And for people not in the US, that's obviously a more expensive thing and harder to do. So one of the things I'm working on is trying to help make sure that there is a wider range of value and people outside of the US can see more value from that. Now, this is done through a number of things, like obviously there's the educational side, and if there's events and talks, then they can be recorded and made available kind of online to members. But then there's also having events outside of the US as well. So one thing I would say is, as of the last election, we now have 3 out of the 12 board members living in the EU/UK. So 25% of the board now is non-US members, and this is as first as far as I'm aware. And this means that we have much more of a desire to help grow and transition over here. And one of the things I always say is there's a benefit to everyone for this, because obviously we grow membership, we grow everything, but building international relationships. If you're in America and you're selling your games in America, if you want to translate your game, the vast majority of those translations are going to happen in the EU. They're going to be European publishing companies that do those translations, and building connections between those works both ways. It helps Americans, it helps Europeans, and so on. So we are really, really looking into ways to help like people outside of the US feel like there is value. But what I would say is I do believe that the value is there, but it's hard because you have to work for that value. Like GAMA Expo is the place to meet and network with other businesses. So for me, the first GAMA Expo I went to, which was a good few years ago now, I met with every single US distributor. I met with Canadian distributors. I met with Australian distributors. I met with so many different distributors at that show, and I had one-on-one conversations with them. And I still have those relationships now. And sure, you know, there's ways to build those outside of the show, but it's an example of it gave me a shortcut, right? It gave me direct access to be sat in front of someone who wasn't running around some busy hall. Like, you know, if you're at something like Gen Con or UK Games Expo, it's very hard to go and talk to publishers when they're at their booth because they want to be selling their games and promoting their stuff. Whilst this is a much more, hey, you're in a room with people for 12 hours a day for 5 days. Let's make stuff happen. So I felt like the value I got out of that, obviously it wasn't immediate, right? You know, I paid X £1,000 to be there and I didn't get it before I left. But over the years, I've gained substantial amounts of money based on those relationships. So it's a long-term investment, but the value's there. But the more immediate value is stuff that we're trying to kind of grow through educational platforms, offerings, and other things like that.
That makes sense. And I have noticed that more and more, like I've been privileged enough that my travel to Cannes has been slightly subsidized because Gigamic wanted me there to help promote the game, Yogi, and I go to a lot of conventions in the UK. I mean, I think it's fair to say that I've been to any convention it's worth being to as a publisher. And that might sound haughty, but if you have a convention and you think it is worth me going to as a publisher, please tell me about it. But yeah, I do find increasingly at UK Games Expo, there's a number of manufacturers, there are people who maybe expect that we might be able to go over and have a meeting, which, as you say, not just is it difficult because they might be busy, but it's also difficult because I'll be busy. I mean, I can't afford the time, frankly, to go over and have a chat with Longpack or whatever, even though I've aimed at our in every UK Games Expo for several years. But I need to make sure that my stand's running okay. And I think last year I was basically there for the entire day minus 30 minutes-ish. And that feels fairly typical. Either I'm doing a talk or I'm there to promote myself. Do you know what I mean? And
absolutely.
It feels very hard to prioritize a long-term plan when I'm really focusing on the short term.
And this is part of it because Expo is such a special event in the sense that you can spend the time focusing on what's important to you. So as another example, right, as a publisher, you have maybe 400-500 representatives of different retailers at GAMA Expo. So if you want to talk to 400-500 different retail shops and make them aware of your game, but not just like tell them about it, tell them how to set it, tell them why it's different to other games, tell them how to use it, then I don't know how you get that opportunity anywhere else. Because when you're at something like UK Games Expo, you might have the odd retailer come by, but the vast majority of people are obviously the direct hobbyists. They're not the retail owners. And if you can, you know, get 100 retailers to suddenly want to start buying your game, and that starts to create demand through distribution, it starts to give you larger kind of sales, bigger prints, and so on. So there's a lot of value from that side as well. But obviously it's different depending on your role, your position. So one of the things that I'm hoping to do, which may or may not happen, but it was a small suggestion I put forward, was there's a main lobby area at GAMA Expo where we all stand and chat, right? Nothing happens. It's just the bit where people convene. So I've put forward the suggestion of can we get one of those walls as a place where any of our creative members can just put a poster of their artwork, just with like their email on the bottom of it? So when I'm stood there chatting with people, there's a wall of artwork of the members behind, and I can look at it and say, hey, that's a piece of art I like. Maybe I'll work with that creative. Maybe I'll do that. And just giving people that direct correlation of interconnected promotion between different people and how you can do stuff. Because I don't know
that's a fun idea, and the cost would be fairly minimal. I mean,
exactly.
You just need to make sure that people are allowed to attach stuff to the wall using white tack or whatever.
And for any publisher or artist, if I find a good artist or an artist finds a publisher to work with, then that covers the cost of being there, right? Because that's a great relationship. So there's lots of little kind of small things as well as the bigger things that we're trying to put forward.
I would like to ask about the relevance to smaller creators. I mean, hypothetically, if you are someone who's maybe been, had their first game kickstarted in 2014 and has been doing this a while, but doesn't know if they'll ever actually crack the US market.
Yeah.
I'm obviously alluding to myself. Is it relevant to me, is what I'm asking.
So it's funny because for me, I feel like for new creators, if you've got, like, obviously, I assume at this point we're talking about someone who's creating a game as opposed to, say, an artist.
We're talking about me.
Yes. So I would say that it is. Now, the challenge is that, as with everything, right, there's no guarantee. You could have a game, you could show it to 100 people, and they will say, we don't want that game. They might all say they do want that game. But for me personally, as a creator, the opportunity to get in front of hundreds of retailers and all of the main primary distributors and to be able to have a chat where the purpose of being there is those discussions rather than talking to consumers and it's just on the side is a huge opportunity to gain large amounts of value. And, as a simple example, I remember I met with an American distributor, and this wasn't actually at Expo, but just to give an example, I met with a distributor. We had a chat, and this was at a show, just completely kind of whatever. And now that was 4 years ago, and they've now spent $1.5 million with me. So when people say to me, is it worth being at shows and conventions? I can kind of say, well, that one meeting with that one company has covered every convention I've ever been to and every convention I ever go to, because it was a huge, huge amount of sales over the years. And GAMA Expo is the prime place to make those long-term connections and make those kind of meetings. But obviously, there's no guarantee anything will come out of those, and that's the hard thing. Like, I don't want to turn around and say, hey, this is the solution for everyone. If you've got a game and you turn up at Expo, you're guaranteed to sell like hundreds of thousands of copies. But it is that step into it.
Yeah, it feels definitely like you have to have those relationships because, I mean, looking at myself, Yogi has sold maybe 100 times as much as In a Bind ever sold. Now, is that mechanically, it is slightly better thanks to like what I suggest. I don't think that's the reason. I mean, product-wise, it is also nicer, and I think that's a big part of the reason. But I think really the biggest part of the reason is the relationships that Gigamic as a big company already have. And as a big company, as anyone who's established, you are able to develop those relationships. And as I mentioned right at the start, someone asked me for tips for Kickstarter and said, you're advising me not to spend much on marketing, but you spend so much on going to UK Games Expo. That's thousands. And I said, yes, but you're comparing yourself to me now, whereas, me 7 years ago, I spent about 20 quid on marketing. And I think you can do that. And
like, to take your kind of statement from there as well is like GAMA going to Expo obviously is seen as GAMA Expo. Sorry, I know we call UK Games Expo as well. So going to GAMA Expo is obviously seen as a big cost. But one of the benefits of GAMA Expo is you don't need to exhibit there, and you don't need to spend money on advertising there. You can do, and there are lots of different tiers and lots of different options. But if you pay for a flight and you pay for a hotel room, then you can get as much value out of it as you may need to, especially if you're there for those networking kind of meeting opportunities. And I would argue that a flight to GAMA Expo and, you know, staying in a cheap hotel nearby is probably less expensive than going to UK Games Expo if you've got a booth and you've got staff and you're trying to cover all the costs of that. Obviously, it depends on what you're doing and stuff, but it's an affordable cost in comparison to other things, and it just comes down to what you think will give you the best amount of value.
Like, it's interesting talking about the relevance to international folk, and so much of this is kind of, and a quick hello to Runa, so much of this is about that one expo. And I understand, and you have to be big enough that, yes, you maybe are in a position of financial privilege, whatever, that you are able to spin the dice. But when is GAMA Expo 2023? And
so it is in April this year. Typically it is in March, but
you mean next year?
In the 2023 it's in April. So typically it's in March, but it is in April this time around. That is in part because of the fact that we are moving to a new venue, but because of the pandemic, the contract with the existing venue got extended by an extra year, because obviously we couldn't run it during the pandemic, and therefore the time's kind of fallen out.
And how much do you budget to go there?
So obviously you have to be a member, and the membership is $300 a year. So that is a standard kind of requirement. And at that point, it's your flight, and obviously your flight is going to depend on where you fly from. So flying from the UK to Nevada, which is where Reno is, you know, anything from £600 to £1,400, depending on who you use, where you fly, how early in advance that you get those flights. I'm sure if you're good at looking into cheaper flights, there might be other options, but somewhere around that. And then accommodation, it depends on where you stay. So I personally do stay at the Peppermill, which is a bit more expensive now. You know, standard hotel costs, but there are plenty of smaller, cheaper hotels nearby as well, which I've heard are far, far cheaper. And I don't know the prices of them off the top of my head, I'm afraid. But
may I ask how much the Peppermill is and how long you need to stay there to make it worthwhile? I mean, I assume that you'd want to stay an extra day or two just to get over your jet lag at the start.
Yeah, so the show itself is basically Monday to Friday, but generally speaking, nothing happens on the Friday. The Friday is kind of when people go home. So I personally fly on the Sunday and then get over my jet lag so that Monday morning I'm ready, and then fly back on the Friday. If you're someone who like finds jet lag a bit harder, then flying in on the Saturday, because obviously it is an 8-hour time difference, and if you need to kind of get used to that, then flying in on the Saturday is probably more preferable. I think the Peppermill itself is probably around like $150 to $200 a night, so not a cheap hotel, but also not crazy expensive compared to some of the others.
Anxie's very impressed with your getting over jet lag. The other questions, let's rush through a bunch of things from Nick Sims, who says, what are your views on crowdfunding? Let's go through these in a kind of rapid fire way, because I'm aware that it's for both of us, you and me, we've got other stuff to get to crack on with.
My views on crowdfunding is it is a wonderful, fantastic thing. And there are, obviously, we are, like, I wrote an article recently on my blog talking about how I think like the golden era of crowdfunding is over, in the sense of I think we had this big bubble where it just kind of became bigger, better, more and more stuff kind of happening. I think we've now kind of peaked and we are on the other side. There is risk, there is more challenges, but this is the same with a lot of things. You know, if you have 500 people set up a coffee shop, probably only one of those coffee shops is still going to exist after a year's time, because it's running a business, and crowdfunding is about running a business. And the more we see people make mistakes, Kickstarters like fail because they don't have enough money and so on, the more you start to see that they've maybe not got the business side of it right. They've not predicted things correctly. They've not worked out things correctly. And that's really hard to judge when you're looking at a Kickstarter page. But fundamentally, that's what crowdfunding is, right? Crowdfunding is looking at a project and going, hey, I would love this to happen. In our industry, we've started talking about how it's bad now because it's become a pre-order platform and it's not about the new creator. But now we're on that other side where creators are starting to mess up and things are going wrong again. People want to go back to, hey, safe pre-order, please, safe pre-order. So it's an intriguing time.
And yeah, Nick Sims also had a question about non-delivery issues. And I guess tied into this is the idea of putting the risk onto the backer, where, because you don't know how much postage is going to be, I mean, I'm aware that you are not speaking for GAMA. I assume that we can both say that GAMA is made up of a multitude of different people with different opinions, and the president does not represent, as much as you might want to be the face of GAMA, you are not the voice of GAMA in reality, is it?
Absolutely. I mean, for answering this question, this will be a personal, frank answer as opposed to a GAMA answer for sure. Because,
but what is your opinion on delivery postage costs tacked on afterwards?
So for me, like personally, I'm not a fan on it. I would much rather we went back to the era of you go to the Kickstarter page, the shipping is included on the page, you pay it, it's done, nothing else happens afterwards. I understand the reason we moved away from that. And it's a challenge because we've moved away from that because the risk grew and the creator was no longer willing to take on that risk. And as such, they have moved that risk onto the backer. And for me, it's hard because I understand it, right? You know, if you think of it from a loving world, everything's created equal. Someone's trying to create something. We want to help them make it. We'll do what it takes to help them achieve that. If something goes wrong, are we going to be angry with them? You know, and so on. But for me, the harder side of me says, look, you're setting up a business, you're doing something to make a living, to make profit. If that's what you want to do, you have to take on this business side. So I'm not a fan of it. I'm extremely against charging more afterwards. You know, if you've said this is the shipping and now you're charging people more for it, like, I don't think you should ever get into that situation. However, if people get into that situation, my assumption it's because they've screwed up their numbers, something's changed, something's gone wrong. And if you still want your game, there is no other option because you can't expect that person to find that money out of nowhere. And this is where it's hard because I don't think it should be passed on, but I also understand that there may be no other option. And that's a tough one. But
like, it feels like a weasel answer in a sense, but that's the truth, that there's no one size fits all question. And because it is such a difficult question, it has to be a case by case basis.
And for me personally, I am trying to work out how to present myself in a way where I can effectively give that guarantee, because I will never ask people for more money for a project. If I've launched a project, it's funded, and I'm delivering it, as far as I'm concerned, that's on me. And you can hold me to that. You can clip this and bring me back to it, right? I am more than happy to live up to that, because that is how I set my own rules. You know, that's what I'm setting myself. It is my job to do that. I want to be accountable for that, and that's something I plan to do. And I wish more creators could do that and be confident in that, but I understand why it's difficult.
It's also about having that financial cushion. I mean, right now, you're in a situation where you do have, I don't know your money situation, but I'm expecting that you've got a little bit of a cushion, right? That if you, and for me, frankly, the scale of categorical, I worked out it would actually be cheaper for me just to refund everyone and, you know, lose 10% on the Kickstarter costs and say, hey, this is it, as opposed to actually make the thing, which is a horrible situation to be in because prices had increased so much given Brexit. And then I said to everyone, okay, I spoke to, I got some amazing advice from someone who chatted to me for a bit and said, look, it doesn't need to be the way you said it would be. It doesn't need to be in a nice box. Just get it in the cheapest box, just whatever you can print. If you want to print it in your print on demand style, do that. And so, yeah, I'm really glad that I did a game about quickly grabbing creatures that are totally different and counting their turnips, beetroots, radishes first, because then that box was 2mm too big to be a large letter. And posting to USA, that can increase the price of postage by a £5. And, you know, within the UK, hey, it's not a big deal. It's like £1, who cares? Well, more like 150 difference, but it's not a big deal. And now, hopefully, next time it'll be okay. We've decided that Disney, we've tried to solve that issue, and hopefully now I'll be like, okay, this is a box small enough, large letter, get it over to everyone, and sorry about this. And my plan right now is, as an apology, I've got more than 100 copies of Innerbind Junior, this thing that's basically out of stock, and I'm going to say, here's something from previous days as an apology, because it is really blooming late. People, I assume, aren't going to expect that unless they're now listening to this. Or I only announced it publicly last night because I was rambling and I had not much to say. But yeah, that's my plan. And I'm really looking forward to getting this all. But again, if you're in that tricky middle situation where you've got thousands of people that you need to deliver a thing to, but then you don't yet have the cushion, that is a horrible situation.
But I think what you've done, I think, it's fantastic, and I think it's a great solution to it. I think for me, part of my challenge with the viewpoint, and again, it's situational, right? You can't hold this against everyone, is if you're, let's just for simplicity, right? If you're running a Kickstarter and you're selling something for $100, then if you've approached that sensibly and you've done your numbers, you've done your predictions for manufacturing, fulfillment, and distribution, all of those things, then there should be a healthy profit margin within that $100. So for me, I'm not doing things in a way of, hey, I think I'm going to have to go back to my cushion of money. I'm doing things of, if I get to a point where I make no profit out of this campaign, but it covers the costs of doing it, then that's more acceptable than passing those costs on to others. And that's my viewpoint. Because for any game, obviously if you're doing a $40 Kickstarter, your profit might be much lower, but the likelihood of your costs going up by such a substantial amount. And this is where it's interesting, and because
that's part of the problem with a very small card game, where sure, I've been accused, I think possibly correctly, of undercharging for some of my stuff. And by Catherine Dreyer recently, who said, oh, I'm really concerned about Bez undercharging, which is fair, because now that I've realized, actually, my most recent thing, which I thought was going to come in, and it's possible that I don't have that, I don't do it 5 times. I haven't done, I think, a 4 times or since the original L deck. I don't think. And I'm okay with that. I do want to have enough of a profit margin that I can afford to sell it to shops. I want to have enough of a profit margin that if it were to go through distribution, then as soon as I start printing 1,000, then okay, I can get it into distribution. I would love that. But at this point, I almost see it as more realistic that things will be licensed to get me an income. And I'm in this weird space where I'm still working out, frankly, how I can make this profitable and keep doing what I love doing and keep making games for people. And this is me going off on a personal rant.
But I think it's really important, because again, I will put my hands up and say, I don't make 5 times on mine either. I'm well below that. The reason I'm happy to do that personally is because I'm a one-person company. I don't have a designer to pay. I don't have like all of these different extra costs. My entirety of doing this for a living, including my office, including my recording studio and everything else, I spend like £6,500 a year. Right? That's my entirety. Outside of my own salary, that's how much it costs for my business to exist. So I don't need to make huge profit margins off stuff. But it's a curious one because with the Isle of Cats, my Kickstarter raised just over £1 million for the second Kickstarter on that. I ended up spending over £200,000 more on shipping than I wanted to due to the climate and the changes of everything. And that's a huge amount, right? You kind of look at that and go, oh my goodness, that's like absolutely crazy. But if you then backtrack that to, I printed 25,000 games, and suddenly it's like, well, that's less than $10 per game. It's like, what, $8 a game, whatever it is. I also printed like 40,000 expansions. I also printed 30,000 copies of Explore and Draw, another game. So if you then backtrack that additional cost, it works out at being, it's about an extra £4 per product that I've produced in this print. And then when you look at it and go, well, if I can't afford to eat £4 off a product, then what profit margins am I working to? What am I doing?
Assuming your things, because like if I can afford to eat £4 off a product that costs me £5, then absolutely. That's a bit that, like, again, this is a thing where frankly marketing doesn't really work. Paid for marketing, I should say, doesn't really work if your cost per unit is very low. Yes. Because if you are spending £1 per backer to get those backers via Facebook, that might be great if your product is Isle of Cats. But if your product is something that costs less than a tenner, you might not be able to afford that.
Absolutely. And this is part of that challenge, because I personally am at a point now where with the current system, I don't think that I will ever run a Kickstarter for a game that's under $40, maybe even under $50, because it becomes much harder to make the margins work and the risks and the cost factors are challenging. And that's something where it sucks, right? Because I've got plenty of games where I'd love to put them out and they're cheaper games, but it is more difficult and it is more challenging. And obviously, a lot of your stuff is well below that price point, and it's difficult. And this is where, going back to the original question, it's always hard to answer these questions because it's so situational. It's so dependent on who it is. If you said to me, hey, there's this big company that's run multiple projects that have raised millions of dollars. They've just run a project that's like raised millions of dollars and it was $200 and now they're asking us for an extra $50. Do you think this is okay? I would say no. If you said to me, hey, there's this person who's run 2 projects, they had like 300-400 backers each, they've raised, £2,000-3,000, £5,000, and now they've turned around and said, hey, we need an extra £5 from each of you to get this out to you, I'd be like, I get that, right? That makes perfect sense. And this is where the answer it scales on situation, people, identities, experience, and all of these kind of things around it.
That makes sense. And I'm aware that with these things, because they are all about opinions, you're speaking again as yourself, not as GAMA. I'd like to close with this question from, again, Nick Sims. I'd also be keen to hear your thoughts on the economic situation over the next few years and how that will impact the industry. I'm concerned that fuel prices and inflation will affect the industry substantially.
So I think the easy answer to this one is, I think that obviously this is much more than just board games, like this is all products. This is everything that we are buying and selling at the moment.
Everything is messed up.
Exactly. So it's very hard to kind of be like, let's just talk about board games with this. But to answer the question, I think that what we're going to see is some people are going to go out of business. Now, obviously, it's always sad when someone goes out of business, but their margins and things just aren't going to work. Perhaps they weren't doing their numbers correctly or whatever, and we will see some people fall out. I think that we will see some new people come in who try and do more interesting things, more unique ways of achieving this. Look at the print and play roll and write systems we've been seeing on Kickstarter recently. Like, they're a fantastic innovation for how to get around this. I have my
Voyages and Aquamarine from Roy Muldoon and Matthew Dunstan.
I actually I have my own thoughts for something I would like to do next year, which would be, as far as I know, completely unique to Kickstarter. I don't know if it will happen or not, but again, it's a way of getting around some of these issues, and it's something that I'm currently researching and exploring. So I think that you'll see innovation.
Color me intrigued.
But and yeah, and I will probably talk to you about it when I do get a bit further with it. But outside of that, you know, we're gonna see costs going up. And again, this is where we're gonna start to see who's been running their businesses well and who are running their businesses on such a tight margin that any issue is going to be a problem for them. Because if you're running a business that's selling tens of thousands of games a month and you're running off making £1 or £2 off each of those games as your profit point, then any change in cost is going to just bankrupt you overnight. And if you're running on healthy margins and running your business well, then that's going to be different. So the other part to that is I think that we will see more. I'd like to think that we'll see more of the bigger, older publishers shifting to less games but better games that are a lot less risky, rather than taking this model of I'm going to put out 10 games a year and see which one sticks. They may be a little bit more, hey, we're only going to put out 3 games this year, but we've got utter confidence in those 3 games. And I think that would be a healthy thing for the industry as a whole, to see more focus on the quality of games rather than the quantity of games.
Conversely, I hope you'd agree it would be a shame if people like myself and Button Shy weren't able to continue making a ridiculous amount of games. And it's interesting that you talk about the absolute prices, like the £1 or £2. And actually, for my next Kickstarter, which I'm going to do very soon, and I've told people in my previous Kickstarter, this is something I need to do to be able to the way that Print on Demand works with Rob, who I'm printing with, I can print 1,000 boxes, but the 1,000 boxes can be different graphics on them. But it's just cheaper for them to all be physically cut at once. And so that means that if I only want 250 of this game, a couple of hundred of this game, by the time I've got 4 games, boom, done. It's going to be basically, and I've easily got more than that I'm ready to put into boxes. So my next thing is going to be for 4 different games, and they will hopefully come in a large letter envelope, which is cheaper to post. And that kind of helps a little bit, because when I'm spending more than a £5 to send you 1 small game, it's a big ask. But when I'm spending like a tenner to send over 4 small games, that's suddenly not as much.
And I think, I guess to rephrase something I said as well, is like, when I say, only making £1 a game, I should probably say only making a 1% profit margin, right? Because obviously that number is dependent on, but even for myself, if you go and look at my latest Kickstarter, the Articats expansions, there was a reason that I released Explore and Draw, the kind of roll and write version of Articats, as part of that Kickstarter. It would have been better for me to have it as its own separate thing, because it would have given it more of a focus, it would give it more highlight, it wouldn't get lost as much behind the expansions. But because I was doing a product that weighed about 4 kilograms and it was in a big box, I thought to myself, if I have another little game that weighs 500 grams, I can ship it in the same box for free. And suddenly, rather than running a Kickstarter where I've got a £10-15 shipping bill per game, there's now no shipping bill for that game, because it's just bundled in. And therefore, it helps keep that cost down. It helps keep that margin down. And those are the kind of decisions I think we'll see more. Like, there's always been this, you shouldn't run a Kickstarter for 2 games at the same time, because that means one of them's good, one's bad, and you're just chucking the other one in. But reversely, now, that would be a far more logical way of doing it economically, because if you can get 2 big box games in 1 box and you only pay 1 lot of shipping, that's a huge saving.
Yeah, and potentially we might also see more digital only things. Like, I can't remember the name of it, the Vietnamese Kickstarter where it looks absolutely gorgeous. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name properly, but it's just allowing people from different countries, if they've got access to good design principles, to some artists who might be also in their own country, they can essentially then earn Western standard money. and it can go really, really well if they've got something worth making.
Absolutely. And one thing I'm really intrigued to see if we see happen, and this is a challenging one, because obviously this would come down to the two people trusting each other and both knowing each other well enough. But if we'll get to a point where we see two different creators run one Kickstarter for both of their things at the same time, manufacture them together and ship them together. So for example, if you've got a $40 game and I've got a $40 game, if we run a campaign and people can buy both of those games, then they only need to pay shipping once rather than having two campaigns where you're having to pay shipping for each one individually. And there's some interesting, huge savings that can be combined, because equally, they're more likely to fill a shipping container now to get those games from China, and they're going to save fortunes on that. So, as I say, it'll be risky and challenging, and there would have to be people who know each other well. But I'm really curious to see if we start seeing unique approaches like that start to kind of bring in these kind of success models.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I know with some indie publishers in the UK, there's a small Discord channel where people have been chatting, hey, could we have a storefront with everyone's games on it? And I hopefully gave them some useful advice. And I said, for me right now, given the number of things that I have, I probably wouldn't want to be part of it. And for me, the challenging thing is the kind of logistics of running it. That's the fundamental challenge. Someone needs to be ready to do that labor. And how do you divide that labor? But we've had a lovely chat. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope we can chat again, maybe in a few months, once GAMA has managed to do some work, and talk about how it's progressing. And let's talk about, well, it's your opportunity to ask us a question, Frank. Question of the day. Here's a little question before we go on our way. So what would you like to ask me and anyone watching, whether watching live or after the facts? What are you curious about?
I should have prepared for this, shouldn't I?
I did tell you at the start.
I guess a question I'm intrigued by is, I don't know if you'll have an answer for this one, but as today's discussion is about GAMA, what could GAMA do that you think would make it worth you becoming a member? Like, what do you think GAMA could offer you to give you the value of wanting to join?
I mean, honestly, after today's discussion, I'm feeling a lot more inclined to join. And you're right. If I add up, like, let's say I get a slightly cheaper hotel. You said you stay in the $150. I'm assuming that's, yes, if you stay further away, there's public transport costs involved. But you could probably lower that to $500 rather than $750 for the week. And then, so it's not... It's always weird when there's a vague thing of education. It's like, what does that mean? Because so much information is available on the internet for free.
Yes, absolutely.
And people want to share that information for free. So there's always a question of, why should I pay this $300 to get vague information when it can be gotten for free? What's going on? I do wonder whether there could be some sort of European event or maybe an Asian event, like maybe in those sorts of free territories. And I know Australia is a big territory, but there's fewer people, so maybe they'd have to go to the Asian one. I don't know. But then that feels like it would serve the world a little bit better and make it... I understand there would be the problem of potentially fracturing things, so that people who would normally all go to this one thing, maybe Dave Salisbury from Fanboy Free might stop going potentially. I don't know, because they might go, oh, well, I'll go to the European one, and that's good enough for me. And you do want it to be this one worldwide focus as the thing. I understand that. I think that... yeah, Xate actually mentioned when you were talking about map, mentioned this thing on Meeple Mountain. And it does feel like, I don't know if you've reached out to them to maybe collaborate, But it feels like engaging more with people saying, hey, you've already done this.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be willing to help us progress this? And I don't know how you... I understand you don't want to have people paid in terms of promotion, but yeah, I don't know if you could say, oh,
So
this
yeah, I
was
mean,
thank you to this person.
my understanding, and obviously just again, I'm not directly involved in like the day-to-day doing of this creation and so on, but my understanding is that there are multiple people out there who have different maps and have different things out there already. One of the largest ones is partnering with GAMA to actually do that. So I
Okay.
don't think it's this one, but there are others out there, and that is the starting point it's coming from. And again, you know, it's not about trying to like, you know, compete or whatever. It's about just trying to build that value in, because
making sure
GAMA,
that people have the resources to carry on, and that there's one focal point. Because yeah, to everyone watching, do you feel like you've gained a better understanding of what GAMA is? Do you feel like if you had you previously considered being a member? Are you already a member, yes or no? And if no, what would inspire you to become a member, I guess, to build on Frank's question to you all? But it has been a lovely chat, and I'm going to ask over to you. What are you up to? You can share Botany if you want to. I am getting ready for Essen. Primarily, I'm going to make sure that my passport is in order. I've got an appointment this afternoon, and I do have to do a little bit more form filling in. I've got the details, I need to write them out, and yep, I just, because I lost my previous passport, now I've had to get all my parents' details to say, oh yeah, this is their passport numbers, which might not be the easiest thing to acquire, to find out the passport numbers of your parents. But that is the primary bits of what I'm up to. I might also go to the post office to drop off a couple of things. Like I got a couple of orders yesterday, which I don't feel like I have to drop off everything that same day. I see on my websites I do posting once a week for my own sanity. It's just more efficient that way. But yeah, I'm sure there was something else. Oh yeah, I have to do 100 drawings and prepare also for the LDEC testing on Saturday. So that's actually a fairly big challenge. But we'll see how it gets on. That might be a late night tonight. Hooray. And I might have very little sleep tonight because that needs to be blooming done. So how about you? What are you up to?
Yeah, it's funny you say about the shipping stuff, because I'm the same. On my website, my estimated shipping is 10 to 14 days. And I try to get it to people within a week, but it's because I know that I might not necessarily be able to. If I'm at Gen Con or something, there might be delays. So there's always that stagnant part. For me, this is going to sound like more of a teaser than I want, but basically I'm preparing all the final bits for a big announcement I'm going to be making soon. Obviously, I can't talk about what the announcement is, but I am currently doing 18-hour days, getting everything done, getting everything ticked off, because I'm also off to Essen soon, and I need to make sure that I've got enough done prior to Essen. I'm trying to work out if I'm going to go to Tabletop Live or not, because I've got so much to get done by the end of this month that the idea of just even being out of my office for a single day doesn't seem realistic. But I'd like to go so much, so I'm battling that one quite a lot at the moment. Are you going to Tabletop Live or not?
Not as a publisher, but I think I'm going to make myself go as a punter. I think I deserve time off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hopefully, if I get to go, obviously I'll see you there, because I'll be the same. I'd be going as a punter.
Yeah, it would be lovely to walk around together and have a chat. Yes. So we've got some comments. It says, seeing as I had no clue what GAMA was or that it was connected to Origins, I learned a lot. Awesome. And Yoda says, I knew something about GAMA, but felt it was very America-based. If there were events in the EU or UK, that would be awesome. Oh, I hate that we can't just say EU and include UK in that.
Like you can't, right? Because I always write EU/UK, but I still think of it as and I don't know if I'm just going to start writing, because I guess when we say EU, we're thinking of the European Union. But I guess if you said Europe, it would still be both. But I don't know. I find it very
Europe does then include other countries that you may or may not want to include, depending on what context it is. Sate is making chocolate bass guitars for a birthday cake. Wow. And later tonight, it's concert time. That sounds amazing. Yoda, small break, then back to work. And yes, see you at Spiel. It will be lovely.
Awesome.
And so that is time for me to recap and wrap up. We talked about going on to new challenges, what is a reward, financial, happiness, sharing good things, the notion of wanting to do a game every 12 to 18 months, which sounds like it will be maintainable, being not afraid of things, enjoying Karuka and Ducks, being about the outreach, having the two groups of GAMA, the elected directors and the paid full-time thing, and the monthly board meetings, origins, how people can change and how we can change to be more aware of what the modern world needs, or what the world needs, let's say. Horizons Fellowship, the safety of board members, making sure that they feel empowered to bring new people on board, having the voting, choosing 6 new people each year, and then voting for the positions, treasurer, secretary, president from those 12. And Frank, it sounds like your only power, I mean, you might want to refute this, fundamentally your only power is having the 1.5 votes, but your responsibilities are basically a bunch of unwritten things that you've decided to adopt. And it's about the communication, that's what you're going to do. You've got 3 EU members talking about the value of that business-to-business event with the GAMA Fair, the GAMA Expo. If you want to go there, it is April, let me get up that date. It was 24th to 27th. At the Peppermill. So I assume if you stay at the Peppermill, it's basically like staying at the Hilton for UK Games Expo. Yeah. I assume it's that kind of setup. And if you want to go, if you want to fly out the way that Frank does, it's $300 membership, $600 to $1,400 for a flight from the UK. I mean, obviously, if you live in USA or Canada or Mexico, I don't know, then it's probably going to be cheaper. Heck, maybe you could take a bus over, depending on, and if you live in Reno, then maybe you could drive over from your house. I don't know where you live. We talked about costs, and it is hard times. Everyone's struggling, and it is all situational. Talking about, yes, we are going to have to potentially do multiple games as a Kickstarter to overcome those challenges of shipping and everything. We are going to have to find new solutions, and it is a luxury hobby, but people need luxuries, so hopefully people will still find something to enjoy even during these hard times. And if you want to check me out, I am Stuff by Bez in all the places, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, blah, blah, blah. Streams tomorrow, I am having a very short stream, as always, on a Friday before I go to playtests. I just give you a quick, hey, here's 5 minutes of my something I want to rant about, and then the title basically tells you most of it. And Saturday, I'll be doing a very short stream and then a very long stream. Once I get my guests over, we will be playing for 10 different LDEC game design contest entries. I'm so excited about it. One of them in particular, well, actually, I don't want to say anything because then that will start expressing my favorites. But I am going to say there's at least 5 that, if any one of these 5 had been submitted, I would be happy to have them as a new core game for the LDEC. So I'm sure that there will be, whether you like, there's no solo games submitted this year, which is very interesting. But whether you like speedy games or solo or slow games or whatever, anyway. But spread the word. And if you want to check out Frank, where do you like to be found?
So City of Games HQ is my Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube channels, and the best place is just going to thecityofgames.com, and you'll find my blog, or cityofkings.com will take you there, and they'll take you to the blog and so on as well.
And of course, if you want to check out GAMA, then it's gamma.org.
Absolutely, and always feel free to reach out if you've got questions. Always happy to discuss.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Frank. Thank you to everyone who's been part of this stream. Thank you to all the audience, everyone watching, whether you're a lurker or someone who's been chatting along and trolling in a gentle, ribbing way. I mean, if you were actually trying to provoke anger, then obviously not cool, but great, I love you. So for now, the only thing left to say is bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go.